Last time you visited, you really, I thought, made a compelling case for what were millions of votes that were disenfranchised. And essentially, we don't know where they ended up. What's the latest reporting on those and anything else that you've discovered?
Well, one of the problems, thank you, Mark, for bringing me back on, because the election ain't over. That is, what I'm looking at now is what we politely call vote suppression, which the definition of that is shafting people of color out of their vote. So one thing that the media is not covering, and during the election, there was a minor bit of coverage about something called vigilante voter attacks. And that's why my film was called Vigilantes, Inc. And what it is this is the weirdest thing. You can actually tell the state in Georgia and 43 other states, don't let Mark Thompson vote, because he doesn't, I don't know where you live, Mark, New Jersey or whatever. He doesn't really live in New Jersey, or they don't have to say that. We just think that Mark Thompson's not a legal voter. This is not the government. This is what I want to emphasize. This is brand new Jim Crow tactic where any voter can challenge the rights of any other voter in their county. And it's not small. The group that is spearheading this and spearheaded this whole action against voters is called True the Vote out of Texas. They raised tens of millions of dollars because of their sponsorship by Donald Trump. They released their movie 2000 Mules from Mar-a-Lago with Trump. And dig this. They signed up 40,000 self-proclaimed vote fraud hunters, vigilantes, and they challenged in this past election as of August. That's 2 months before the election. 2 months before the election. Actually, 3 months before the election, they had already challenged 852,000 voters. They announced their goal of 2 million, but I didn't get their latest numbers. And you'll hear Martin Sheen at the beginning of the film explain that they already knocked off 852,000 voters, almost all of them voters of color, aiming for 2 million. This is not reported. And it's not like they're hiding it. They're on the net. Now, I personally got their lists of people that they challenged in Georgia, for example. And in Georgia, they challenged probably close to 300,000 voters. 300,000, almost all of them voters of color, and including, for example, you'll see in the film Vigilantes, Inc., which is, they had one GOP official, the chairman of the Republican Party in Southern Georgia. He challenged 4,000 voters. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know anything about them, but he got this list from True the Vote, and he simply sent it to his county. 4,000 voters were blocked from voting, including, and you'll meet him in the film, Major Gamaliel Turner, career military officer, and in his 70s. I just spoke to him. His vote was challenged because why? Because he was one of 4,000 soldiers, just about all of them black soldiers at Fort Benning or in the Fort Benning area, who were assigned elsewhere. They were assigned to Syria. They were assigned to Germany. They were assigned to California in the case of Major Turner. And he calls up his county voting office, the registrar, and says, "Where's my absentee ballot? The election's in a couple of days." And they say, "Well, Mr. Turner, you've been challenged." He says, "What does that mean?" "Well, we can't send you your ballot because someone has challenged your vote." And he said, "Well, what do I do about that?" And they said, "No problem. Just come into our office. Prove you're an American citizen. Prove that you still own your home in Georgia," which he does. It's on the property rolls. And then we'll give you your ballot. Now, may I add that Major Turner is African American? So he says, "Wait a minute. You're telling me that all I have to do is fly 2,700 miles and prove I'm an American citizen?" This is Major Turner. "I'm an American citizen again." The reason he says again, because he remembers the Jim Crow era, and he is the son of Reverend Harold Turner, who co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King. And so you know what he did? he got his lawyer, Mark Elias, to fly from Washington, D.C. to Georgia. And eventually he did fly the 5,000 miles round trip to get his vote counted by order of a federal judge who, by the way, said, well, I'll let Major Turner have his vote. But the 4,000 others, those black soldiers, they were out of luck and they didn't get their ballots. And I just got off the phone with Major Turner. He sent in an absentee ballot this last election, a couple weeks before the election. And he just got a notice. He looked it up that they didn't count his ballot because it was supposedly received 2 days after the election. He mailed it 2 weeks before the election. These are the games that they're playing. So in the
here's a question about Georgia, because these are shocking numbers. I mean, the whole process by which they disenfranchise voters is insanely shocking. But just on the numbers themselves, here is a comment from Randy. He says, I read an article that says that 63,000 voters were challenged in Georgia, but only about 1% were not removed from the rolls. Is the 63,000 number accurate, or were there more? Regardless of this specific question and the 63,000 thing, I guess what we're asking through Randy on this question is, so at the end of all of that, what happens, Greg, to many of these votes to which you've referred that don't get counted because of these ridiculous challenges?
Okay, so let me tell you, in 2020, this vigilante voter game was taken for a test drive in Georgia before it was rolled out to the 43 other states. And in 2020, they challenged 180,000 voters. This time it was about double, about 300,000 were challenged. And that's, by the way, proudly announced by the challengers. They're not hiding this.
Now, that's in Georgia, or that's
Georgia, not nationwide.
Just Georgia, right. Nationwide, it was
Georgia.
millions. Yeah,
now, I would say that, well, they're claiming 2 million. They were, certainly we know about 852,000.
Okay.
As of 3 months before the election were challenged. So as to whether 63,000 were ultimately rejected, I'm getting the numbers right now from the Secretary of State's office. They hide this stuff, but 63,000 is would be about roughly correct of the number of voters who are denied the right to vote. And it happens two ways. They go in, they say you're challenged, or three ways. They go in, they say you're challenged, and then they give you a provisional ballot. I call provisional ballots placebo ballots, because you think you fill out this form and the lady behind the desk says, just fill this out and they'll check your registration and they'll count your vote. No, they don't. If you're challenged, you're not on the voter rolls, that's it. You lose your vote. Most people don't realize. And let me tell you something, Mark. In the 2020 election, according to the U.S. government, the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, which tracks these things, there were 10 million provisional ballots 4 years ago. This time I'm looking at the numbers, and it looks like there's about 15 to 20 million this time. 10 million voters were shunted to provisional ballots, 2.7 million. And again, this is the U.S. government stats. 2.7 million of those ballots were rejected. And most people don't even know it, that it was rejected. Now, the other thing, about 60% of Americans mail in their ballots or vote early. If you mail in your ballot, most people, unlike Major Turner, when they were challenged, got their ballots. But here's the evil thing. They mail in their ballots. They don't know that they've been challenged, which they were challenging voters on election day and the day after. And so people whose votes were challenged, who mailed them in, don't know that their ballot was never counted. They could look online. But who checks their ballot, their mail-in ballot online? And the only way you can cure it is by literally physically going into, as they told Major Turner, you have to physically go into your registrar's office with ID proving you're a citizen, proving you live where you live. And this virus, as Mark Elias said, this is the virus out of Georgia from 2020 that went viral to 43 other states this past election. And it's not just through the vote with their 2 million challenges. We have groups like the Pigpen Project, which mounted mass challenges in Nevada. And that race was supposedly won by Trump by like 0.1%. But if you put back a fraction of the voters who were challenged and lost their vote, Trump did not win Nevada. Same with
That brings us to the heart of the matter. Greg, as you see it and you look at this election, tell me what you feel the results actually were when if this massive organized disenfranchisement hadn't happened.
Well, okay, there's many types of disenfranchisement. The vigilante challenges. And again, you can see my film Vigilantes Inc. Look at the numbers. Meet the people who are challenged. And by the way, I'm the only journalist that actually got the challengers on camera.
Yeah, there's some remarkable moments in the film when Greg actually confronts them.
I confronted the challengers. You meet the challenged at Vigilantes Inc. And again, just go to gregpalast.com or save your vote, not my vote or Mark's vote, saveyourvote.org. There it is. Just or Vigilantes Inc. Look that up. And it is on YouTube now. Thank you, Leonardo DiCaprio, for funding that, giving it out for free. It's still a live issue. So now the question, did it change the election? Nevada, Arizona, absolutely no question. Now I'm looking at the other numbers. Now, I used to be a professor of statistics, and I'm a journalist. I don't like to reach conclusions until I have all the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. So I know Nevada and Arizona were flipped through racial vote suppression tactics, Jim Crow stuff, and maybe Georgia. I'm looking at those numbers now. I'm looking at Michigan. I'm looking at Wisconsin. I'm looking at those swing states, but I don't want to make a final conclusion. But I can tell you at this moment, absolutely Arizona and Nevada went for Harris, except for the voters removed by vigilante vote challengers and other horrific Jim Crow trickery that is not getting reported. I'm giving you the numbers. I'm giving you the names. You know, Mark, we'll give you one other thing. Massive purges of the voter rolls, overwhelmingly voters of color. And when I looked at this in Georgia and Wisconsin, I brought in the experts that work with Amazon on addresses. You know, Mark, you never get someone else's tidy-whities. You have a common name, Mark Thompson, but you know, Amazon doesn't send it. Your toaster.
They still know where the Mark Thompsons are in the individual.
What they do? They use 1,800 matching points to make sure they got the right Mark Thompson. But what happens in Georgia, for example, Brian Kemp knocked off 500,000 voters off the voter rolls. We sent that to the Amazon experts, and they ran it through their address checkers because Kemp said these people don't live in Georgia. They don't live at their voting address. And they said 340,134. We're being very exact. These are the people. We have their names and addresses. Every single one were wrongly removed. And who are these people? You'll meet one in my film, a couple in my film. One, Christine Jordan, 92 years old, voting at the same voting station 50 years. They said, scram, you don't live in Georgia anymore. Get out of this polling station. 92 years old. I went to her house that they said that she doesn't live in anymore. And there's a picture of Martin Luther King on the wall. This is Martin Luther King's cousin, who began voting the year her cousin was murdered. And if they can remove, those are the people you'll meet in the film.
But this is critical. This is critical vote totals in critical states that determine the outcome of the election. And so it comes to this. It's being asked. So when you say the election's not over, what do you mean by that?
Well, I want to have a count of those uncounted votes. So, for example, there were 2.7 million provisional ballots rejected. And by the way, what's interesting, right? Supposedly these are not legal voters. Well, of 2.7 million people, how many did you arrest? Because it's a felony crime in every state and federal crime to vote or register to vote if you're not a legal voter. Of the 2.7 million voters, how many do you think were arrested for voting or registering illegally?
Yeah,
just guess.
The answer. The answer is none.
None, zero, not one out of 2.7. So, but you know what? They're not. It's not just if it was random, it wouldn't matter, right? I'm a statistician. If it's random, it doesn't make a difference. It's not random. If you're Black, Hispanic, Asian American, the chance you'll be shunted to a provisional ballot is 300% higher than if you're white. And if you're Black, the chance your vote will be rejected as a provisional ballot rejected or other reasons it will be rejected is 7. If you're Black, it's 700% higher than if you're white. That's the official. By the way, I didn't come up with these numbers. They're from the United States government agencies, which is why they want to kill these agencies, right? Because they want us to remember, a lot of our agencies are about information, and so they want you to be blinded, and they want a Justice Department which does not will not defend the Voting Rights Act. They're going to try to eliminate the Voting Rights Act. They've done a good job with their Torquemada Supreme Court. But even if they can't get more of the Voting Rights Act removed by the court, who's going to enforce it?
Well, this is the question we're getting. How do you avoid this?
With the state of Georgia for illegally removing black people, right? As Attorney General, good effing luck.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's what I say from time to time. Who watches the watchers, right? The laws can be there, but if no one's enforcing them, then they essentially are not there. So what's being asked? Two things are being asked. One, could you and Elias bring a class action suit in some way to bring this at minimum to a even bigger public profile and attention, and even greater outcome could be hoped for? And also, what's the strategy going forward in the next election, 2026, the midterm?
Okay, number one, what is the status of lawsuits? There's two types of lawsuits we need. So I just was speaking with the Gerald Griggs, who's the president of the NAACP of Georgia. He's one of America's top trial lawyers. You might know him as the guy that put R. Kelly in prison. This guy's a sharp lawyer, and he is preparing class action suits. He's already filed some suits. The problem is you had judges even before the election who said, well, it's too early to see what happens. It's premature. And then after the election, they say it's too late. Remember that you have about a third of the federal bench now has been filled by Trump. A third of the federal bench. So you're talking about Trump's judges that you have to go to. It's really difficult. But that's Gerald Griggs. I've also worked with the ACLU. I've been working with Black Voters Matter Fund. In fact, because of I have another hat besides investigative reporter, which is an expert on these statistical issues for the Department of Justice. And so I went into federal court with Black Voters Matter, with Rainbow Push, Jesse Jackson's organization. We went to federal court when we said that the state of Georgia had removed 198,000 voters illegally. We weren't guessing. We actually gave the court every single name and address of voters wrongly removed from the polls. And the one thing, this was 2 years ago when Reverend Warnock was running for re-election as senator from Georgia. And the judge just said, well, ordered the state to work with us on putting these voters back. And the state was dragging its heels, but we were able to get about 100,000 voters back on the rolls, which was the margin for Reverend Warnock's reelection. So you can win. I don't want everyone to go into despair. You can win some of the time. They can't steal all the votes all the time, but it would be really helpful if our media, like, for example, the New York Times ran a little report on these vigilante voter challenges. They talked about dozens, not 852,000. They're talking about dozens. And they never, ever, you'll notice this with the Times, Wash Post, the Petroleum Broadcast System, all those guys. They'll talk about vote suppression tactics before an election, but never, ever, ever, ever after an election say that it had any effect on the election. So why are they even reporting it? If vote suppression doesn't affect the elections, why do you bother even report about it?
Sure.
So they never, because in American media, remember, I work with the Guardian, BBC Television, and that's the only way I can report out my stuff, and Rolling Stone and other kind of somewhat alternative media. I don't think.
But Greg, the alternative. We got to wrap up. But the alternative media that you do provide reporting for, and the film, these things make enough noise that they do cut through, and eventually these conversations are had in more mainstream forums. I really feel as though that's why I like this conversation, because it just adds to the rumble. And if the rumble gets loud enough, then it gets people's attention and it becomes indisputable and undeniable,
Well, it's funny. The New York Times, I remember I ran a story for the BBC and Guardian back in 2000 when Bush v. Gore, that 58,000 black men were removed from the voter rolls before that election. That flipped the election. That made George W. president over Gore, removing these black voters. And the New York Times would not cover it, period. And the Washington Post, which is my sister paper to the Guardian, they would not cover it. ABC television is sister station to BBC. They would not cover it. But then 4 years later, the New York Times talked about the infamous purge of black voters in Florida in 2000, referencing my story. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't you run it 4 years earlier? And this is the problem we have. But we do create enough noise that we have killed these things. We had one program that knocked off 1.1 million voters called Interstate Cross-Check, where they would take every Jose Garcia and say, oh, that's the same guy voting,
right,
1,000 times. They actually had a guy named James Brown that they said this one voter, James Brown in Georgia, voted 288 times. I'm not making this up. It's just obviously you'd say, well, it's a common name, James Brown, but not for Republican. But we ended that program. We put the publicity, the action, ACLU took action, and we shut down these evil Jim Crow programs, but then they come up with another one. So we got rid of cross-check. They come up with the vigilante voter challenges. So every election, we have to beat down another Jim Crow tactic.
Sure. There's a whack-a-mole quality to this that's definitely frustrating, and I consider it un-American, but it's this snuffing out of the people's voice. But I love that you're talking about it. And look, any new reporting, any new breakthrough, I really encourage you to let us know, and let's get you back. And everyone should see Vigilantes Inc. You can find it right here on YouTube for those of you who are watching us on YouTube. And if you're listening on podcasts, again, find it on YouTube or, again, at Greg's website. And we'll have a link to Greg's website underneath this video and in the description for this episode. Greg, I mad respect for your reporting and all the work you do, and I can't wait for us to talk to you again. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much for this platform to just warn people to stay alert. Thanks.
Right on. Greg Palast, everybody. See you again. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.